Have you ever wondered how something can exist and yet be completely empty at the same time? This isn't a riddle or a Zen koan meant to confuse you. It's actually one of the most profound and transformative teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, a concept that has the power to radically shift how you perceive reality itself. The doctrine of emptiness, or Śūnyatā in Sanskrit, stands as the cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy, yet it remains one of the most misunderstood concepts in spiritual practice today. If you're seeking to understand the deepest dimensions of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and unlock a perspective that could fundamentally transform your relationship with reality, subscribe now and activate notifications. This journey into emptiness will challenge everything you think you know about existence. The paradox of emptiness begins with a simple yet revolutionary insight. When we look at the world around us, everything appears solid, permanent, and independently existing. Your body feels real. This chair you're sitting on seems undeniably substantial. The thoughts flowing through your mind appear to belong to a concrete, unchanging self. But what if all of this apparent solidity is actually an illusion created by your mind? What if the very foundation of your perceived reality is fundamentally empty of the characteristics you've always assumed it possessed? This isn't about denying that things exist. The teaching of emptiness in Tibetan Buddhism is far more nuanced and sophisticated than simple nihilism. When the great Indian master Nagarjuna systematized the Madhyamaka philosophy in the 2nd century, he wasn't suggesting that nothing exists at all. Rather, he was pointing to a profound truth about the nature of existence itself. Things exist, but they don't exist in the way we habitually believe they do. They lack inherent existence, independent existence, existence from their own side. This is what we mean by emptiness. Understanding this distinction is crucial because the Western mind, when first encountering the concept of emptiness, often falls into one of two extreme views. The first extreme is nihilism, believing that emptiness means nothingness, that the teaching implies reality is completely non-existent or meaningless. The second extreme is eternalism, clinging to the belief that phenomena possess some kind of permanent, unchanging essence or soul. The Madhyamaka philosophy, the middle way, navigates precisely between these two extremes. It acknowledges that phenomena arise and function, yet simultaneously reveals that they are empty of any intrinsic, independent nature. Let's ground this in something concrete. Consider a simple wooden table. When you look at it, your mind immediately labels it as a table and treats it as a singular, independent object. But is there really a table existing independently out there? If we begin to investigate, we find that what we call a table is actually a collection of parts. Wood from trees, metal screws or nails, perhaps some glue, the labor of carpenters, the knowledge passed down through generations about furniture making. Each of these components, in turn, is made up of smaller parts. The wood consists of cells, which consist of molecules, which consist of atoms, which modern physics tells us are mostly empty space with probability clouds of subatomic particles. At no point in this analysis do we find an independent, unchanging essence called tableness. The table exists conventionally. We can use it, we can see it, we can put things on it, but it doesn't exist inherently from its own side, independent of causes, conditions, parts, and most importantly, independent of the mind that labels it as a table. A termite doesn't see a table, it sees food. A physicist doesn't see a solid object, but a dynamic dance of atoms and forces. The table exists, but it's empty of inherent existence. This is the heart of the emptiness teaching. Nagarjuna expressed this profound insight in his foundational text, the Madhyamaka, the fundamental verses on the middle way. In one of his most famous statements, he writes that whatever is dependently arisen, that is explained as emptiness. This identity between dependent arising and emptiness is revolutionary. It means that the very fact that something depends on causes and conditions for its existence is exactly what makes it empty of inherent existence. Emptiness doesn't negate existence, rather, it explains how existence is possible at all. Think about it this way. If things existed inherently, from their own side, independent of anything else, they could never change, never interact, never be affected by causes and conditions. A seed that existed inherently as a seed could never become a sprout. It would be frozen in permanent seedness. But because the seed is empty of inherent existence, because it depends on soil, water, sunlight, and countless other conditions, transformation becomes possible. The sprout can emerge. Growth, change, and the entire dynamic flow of life depend entirely on emptiness. This brings us to perhaps the most challenging aspect of the emptiness teaching. Not only are external objects empty of inherent existence, but so too is the self, the I, the sense of being a separate, independent person that seems so undeniably real. When you search for this self, where is it? Is it in your body? But your body is constantly changing. The cells that composed your body 7 years ago have almost all been replaced. Is it in your mind? But your thoughts, emotions, and consciousness are in constant flux, arising and passing away moment by moment. The teaching of emptiness reveals that what we call the self is actually a convenient label we place on a constantly changing collection of physical and mental aggregates. Just like the table, the self exists conventionally, but it's empty of inherent existence. This doesn't mean you don't exist. You're reading these words right now, after all. But it means that you don't exist in the way you've always assumed, as some kind of permanent, unchanging, independently existing entity. Understanding this deeply is what Buddhist tradition calls realizing selflessness or non-self, and it's considered essential for liberation from suffering. Now you might be thinking, this all sounds very philosophical, but what does it actually mean for my daily life? Does understanding emptiness have any practical relevance, or is it just an abstract mental exercise? This is where the teaching becomes truly transformative. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition has always emphasized that understanding emptiness isn't merely an intellectual pursuit. It's meant to be realized directly through meditation and contemplation, and when it is, it fundamentally transforms your experience of life. Consider how much of your suffering comes from grasping, from clinging to things as if they were permanent and independently existing. You cling to your body, terrified of aging and death because you believe it to be a solid, permanent self. You cling to your possessions, your relationships, your achievements, believing they can provide lasting security and happiness. You cling to your self-image, constantly defending and promoting an identity you believe to be real and substantial. All of this grasping creates suffering because it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. When you begin to realize emptiness, even partially, something remarkable happens. The grip of grasping loosens. You still care for your body, but you're not terrorized by its inevitable changes. You still value your relationships, but you're not desperately clinging to them as sources of permanent security. You still function in the world, but with a lightness and flexibility that wasn't possible before. This is why Nagarjuna said that understanding emptiness is the gateway to liberation. The realization of emptiness also has profound implications for compassion. At first, this might seem counterintuitive. If everything is empty, including other beings, why should we care about their suffering? But actually, the opposite is true. When you deeply understand that all beings are empty of inherent existence, that we're all dependently arisen phenomena without any fixed, separate essence, the boundaries between self and other begin to dissolve. You recognize that the distinction between your suffering and someone else's suffering is ultimately arbitrary, a conventional designation rather than an absolute truth. This recognition naturally gives rise to what Tibetan Buddhism calls bodhicitta, the awakened heart of compassion. You want to help all beings achieve freedom from suffering, not because of some external moral obligation, but because at the deepest level, you recognize there's no fundamental separation between you and them. Emptiness and compassion are thus inseparable. The wisdom that realizes emptiness and the compassion that embraces all beings are described in the tradition as the two wings of the bird flying toward enlightenment. You need both. Let's explore how contemporary science is beginning to touch on insights that resonate with the emptiness teaching. Quantum physics has revealed that at the subatomic level, matter doesn't behave like solid, independently existing particles. Instead, particles exist in states of probability and potentiality until they're observed or measured. The famous double-slit experiment demonstrates that electrons can behave as both particles and waves, and that the act of observation itself influences what manifests, while we must be careful not to make simplistic equations between quantum physics and Buddhist philosophy. These findings do suggest that reality at its most fundamental level is far more interdependent and less solidly existing than our everyday perception suggests. Neuroscience has also provided fascinating insights relevant to the teaching of emptiness, particularly regarding the self. Studies of brain function reveal no single location or structure that could be identified as the self. Instead, what we experience as a unified self is actually the result of countless neural processes occurring throughout the brain, a construction that the brain creates to make sense of experience. When Buddhist practitioners who have trained extensively in meditation on emptiness and non-self undergo brain scans, researchers have found decreased activity in regions associated with self-referential thinking and increased activity in areas associated with present-moment awareness and compassion. The implications extend into psychology and mental health as well. Many contemporary therapeutic approaches, particularly those influenced by mindfulness and Buddhist psychology, work with concepts that parallel the emptiness teaching. Cognitive therapy, for instance, helps people recognize that their thoughts and mental constructs aren't solid truths but rather interpretations that can be examined and changed. Acceptance and commitment. Therapy encourages a process called cognitive diffusion, learning to see thoughts as thoughts rather than as reality itself, which closely parallels the Buddhist practice of recognizing the empty nature of mental phenomena. Research on meditation practices derived from Tibetan Buddhism has shown measurable benefits for mental health. Studies on practitioners of analytical meditation on emptiness have found reductions in anxiety, depression, and stress, along with increases in well-being, emotional regulation, and cognitive flexibility. When you stop identifying so strongly with your thoughts and emotions, when you recognize them as empty of inherent existence, as dependently arisen phenomena that will naturally pass, you develop a spaciousness that allows difficult experiences to move through without overwhelming you. Throughout human history and across cultures, we find echoes of the emptiness insight in various forms. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus taught that you cannot step into the same river twice, recognizing the constant flux and impermanence of all phenomena. The Taoist tradition speaks of Wu Wei, effortless action that flows with the natural order rather than imposing fixed structures. Even in Western mystical traditions, we find descriptions of experiences where the boundary between self and other dissolves, where everything is recognized as interconnected and interdependent. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious and his exploration of archetypes provide another interesting parallel. Jung recognized that what we consider the individual psyche isn't as separate and self-contained as we typically assume. We're all connected to deeper patterns and processes that transcend individual identity. While Jung wasn't speaking about emptiness in the Buddhist sense, his work points toward a recognition that the boundaries of the self are far more fluid and permeable than everyday consciousness suggests. In literature and art, the theme of emptiness and the illusory nature of solid reality appears again and again. Shakespeare's famous line, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players," points to the constructed, performative nature of identity. The Romantic poets often wrote about moments of transcendence where ordinary perception fell away, and a deeper, more interconnected reality was glimpsed. These universal themes suggest that the insight into emptiness touches something fundamental about human consciousness and its relationship to reality. So how do you actually work with the teaching of emptiness in practice? The Tibetan Buddhist tradition offers a rich array of methods for contemplating and meditating on emptiness. One of the most accessible approaches is analytical meditation on the emptiness of the self. You begin by bringing to mind your ordinary sense of I, the feeling of being a separate, independent person. Then you investigate. Where is this I? Is it in your body? If you lost a limb, would you cease to be you? Is it in your mind? But which thought or feeling is the real you? As you search, you don't find any independently existing self. You find only a collection of constantly changing physical and mental processes, none of which by itself or collectively constitutes an inherent self. This isn't meant to lead to a sense of not existing at all. Rather, it leads to a recognition that you exist conventionally, as a dependently arisen process, but you're empty of the inherent, independent existence you'd always assumed. When this insight begins to dawn, even intellectually, it can be profoundly liberating. The tight knot of self-grasping loosens just a little, creating space for greater peace and compassion. Another powerful practice is contemplating the emptiness of phenomena through dependent arising. Choose any object, your phone, a flower, a sound. Investigate how it depends on causes and conditions for its existence. A flower depends on a seed, soil, water, sunlight, the absence of frost, the presence of pollinating insects, and countless other factors. Each of those factors in turn depends on other causes and conditions. When you trace back these chains of dependent arising, you never find a starting point, an independent cause that exists from its own side. Everything arises in dependence on everything else, an infinite web of interconnection. This is the ultimate nature of reality, and it's precisely what we mean by emptiness. The Lamrim, the graduated path to enlightenment that forms the foundation of Tibetan Buddhist practice, includes extensive teachings on emptiness as the ultimate wisdom to be cultivated. After developing renunciation, the determination to be free from suffering, and bodhicitta, the compassionate wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, the practitioner turns to the wisdom, realizing emptiness. This is the sharp sword that cuts through ignorance, the fundamental misunderstanding of reality that keeps beings trapped in cyclic existence. In the Tibetan tradition, emptiness is not only contemplated analytically, but is also integrated into tantric practices. In deity yoga, for example, practitioners visualize themselves as enlightened beings. This practice works on multiple levels, but one of the most profound is that it disrupts the ordinary, solidly existing self-concept. By repeatedly dissolving the ordinary self and arising as a deity, then dissolving that deity identity as well, practitioners train in recognizing the empty, illusory nature of all appearances, including the appearance of self. The deity appears vividly, yet is recognized as empty of inherent existence, like a rainbow, beautiful and present yet without solidity. The Zogchin tradition, the great perfection teachings of the Nyingma school, approaches emptiness through the recognition of Rigpa, the pristine awareness that is the fundamental nature of mind. In Zogchin, emptiness isn't something to be achieved or created, but rather the already present nature of awareness itself. When thoughts arise in the mind rather than following them or suppressing them, the practitioner simply rests in awareness of their empty nature. The thoughts arise, display, and dissolve naturally, like drawings on water leaving no trace. This is recognizing emptiness not as a philosophical concept, but as the living reality of experience, moment by moment. Perhaps one of the most beautiful aspects of the emptiness teaching is that it's ultimately inexpressible, through concepts alone. Language by its very nature creates subjects and objects, things and characteristics, existence and non-existence. But emptiness transcends all these conceptual elaborations. This is why the Heart Sutra, one of the most important texts on emptiness, includes the famous line, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These aren't two different things. Form, the world of appearances, is itself empty of inherent existence. And emptiness isn't some void existing separately from form, it's the very nature of form itself." When Candrakirti, the great 7th century master, elaborated on Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka philosophy, he emphasized that emptiness is itself empty. This is called the emptiness of emptiness. Even emptiness doesn't exist as some kind of absolute, independently existing reality. This prevents the subtle mistake of reifying emptiness, of turning it into just another object of grasping. The ultimate nature of reality transcends all conceptual positions, including the position that things are empty. This is why the tradition speaks of the middle way, free from all extremes. For many Western practitioners, the teaching of emptiness can initially feel cold or nihilistic, as if it's somehow negating the richness and meaning of life. But actually, the opposite is true. When you realize emptiness, when you recognize that phenomena don't exist inherently, but arise in dependence on causes and conditions, the world becomes more vivid, more immediate, more precious. Everything is seen as a magical display, appearing yet empty like a dream or an illusion. This doesn't diminish experience. It liberates it from the heaviness of grasping and fixation. Think about how you experience a beautiful sunset. If you're grasping at it, trying to make it permanent, wishing it wouldn't fade, there's a subtle suffering in the experience. But if you can appreciate the sunset while simultaneously knowing that it's dependently arisen, that it will pass, that it's empty of inherent existence, then you can be fully present with its beauty without the suffering of grasping. The sunset is no less beautiful. In fact, its impermanent, empty nature is part of what makes it so poignant and precious. This understanding transforms how you relate to difficult experiences as well. When pain arises, whether physical or emotional, recognizing its empty nature doesn't make it instantly disappear, but it creates space around it. The pain is no longer a solid, permanent, independently existing enemy that defines your entire reality. It's a dependently arisen phenomenon that has causes and conditions that will change and pass, that's empty of inherent existence. This recognition allows you to be with the pain without being overwhelmed by it, without adding layers of suffering through resistance and identification. The teaching of emptiness also revolutionizes ethics and action in the world. Some people worry that if everything is empty, if there's no inherent self, then why bother with moral behavior? Why care about consequences? But actually, understanding emptiness makes ethics more important, not less. Because phenomena are dependently arisen, cause and effect function reliably within the conventional world. Your actions have consequences that ripple out, affecting yourself and countless other beings. Understanding emptiness gives you the wisdom to act more skillfully, knowing that while nothing exists inherently, everything you do matters within the web of interdependence. Moreover, when you realize that your own suffering and the suffering of others both arise from the same fundamental ignorance, the same mistaken belief in inherent existence, compassion becomes not just a nice idea but a natural response. You want to help others realize emptiness because you know from your own experience that this realization is the key to freedom from suffering. The wisdom of emptiness and the compassion of bodhicitta work together, each supporting and deepening the other. As you continue to practice and contemplate emptiness, subtle shifts begin to occur in your consciousness. Situations that once triggered intense grasping or aversion begin to feel lighter, less solid. You might notice a gap between a thought arising and your identification with it, a space where you can recognize, oh, this is just a thought, empty of inherent existence. Gradually, the tight sense of being a separate, defended self begins to relax. This doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual process of familiarization, of training the mind to see reality as it actually is, rather than as it appears through the distorting lens of ignorance. The great masters emphasize that realizing emptiness isn't the end of the path, but rather transforms into the path itself. Once you've glimpsed the empty nature of reality, you continue to deepen and stabilize that realization through meditation, through integrating it into daily life, through testing it against experience. The intellectual understanding ripens into direct perception, and eventually into the non-conceptual wisdom that is said to be like water poured into water, inseparable from the nature of mind itself. In the contemporary world, with all its complexity and challenges, the teaching of emptiness offers profound resources for navigating life with greater wisdom and compassion. In the face of climate change, political polarization, and social fragmentation, the recognition of interdependence and emptiness reminds us that nothing exists in isolation. Our actions affect the whole web of life. Our suffering and our liberation are inseparable from the suffering and liberation of all beings. This isn't mystical thinking. It's the actual nature of reality, recognized through both contemplative wisdom and contemporary systems thinking. The path of realizing emptiness is not separate from the path of living a meaningful, engaged life. It's not about withdrawing from the world into some abstract philosophical realm. Rather, it's about engaging with the world more fully, more compassionately, more skillfully, because you're not caught in the trap of grasping at things as solid and permanent. You can show up for whatever life presents, responding with wisdom and compassion, rather than reacting from habitual patterns of ignorance. As you reflect on what you've learned about emptiness today, consider how this teaching might transform your own experience. What would it be like to hold your own self-concept more lightly, recognizing it as a useful convention rather than an absolute truth? How might your relationships change if you saw both yourself and others as dependently arisen, empty of inherent existence, yet nonetheless functioning and worthy of care? What freedom might become available if you stopped grasping at experiences as solid and permanent and instead learned to dance with the fluid, interdependent nature of reality? The teaching of emptiness is an invitation to wake up from a dream you didn't know you were having. The dream of solid, separate, independently existing phenomena. It's an invitation to see reality as it is, vibrant and immediate, yet empty of the characteristics we habitually project onto it. This seeing doesn't diminish life. It reveals life's true nature as a magical display, full of meaning precisely because it's empty of inherent existence. Every moment becomes precious because it's impermanent, interdependent, and yes, beautifully empty. Which aspect of emptiness resonates most deeply with you right now? Is it the recognition that the self is not as solid as it seems? The understanding that your suffering comes from grasping at things as permanent? The liberating insight that everything is interconnected through dependent arising? Share your reflections and experiences in the comments below. This teaching is not meant to be grasped intellectually alone. It comes alive through contemplation, practice, and dialogue with others on the path. If you found this exploration of emptiness valuable and want to continue deepening your understanding of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and practice, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and have notifications turned on. We're creating a community dedicated to authentic spiritual exploration, where ancient wisdom meets contemporary life. Each video is designed to offer both intellectual clarity and practical guidance for transformation. Share this video with someone who's ready to question their assumptions about reality, someone who's seeking a deeper understanding of existence. The teaching of emptiness has the power to transform not just individual lives, but our collective relationship with reality itself. In a world that desperately needs wisdom and compassion, understanding emptiness might be one of the most important things we can offer. Thank you for being part of this journey into the heart of Tibetan Buddhist wisdom.